Okay, let's dive into a story from the ancient world that is incredibly complex and frankly challenging.
Hmm.
We are opening up 2 Samuel chapter 11, the pivotal account involving King David, Bathsheba, and Uriah the Hittite.
And to help us navigate this, we've pulled insights from quite a range of places. We have traditional Bible commentaries, academic analysis, looking at the social context and, power dynamics,
Right.
and also articles that really dig into the individual characters and the timeless, sometimes uncomfortable lessons waiting here.
So, our mission in this deep dive is basically to take this stack of sources, trace the events as they unfold, explore the different perspectives they offer,
Yeah.
and extract the most important, surprising, and insightful knowledge nuggets about human nature, power, temptation, and integrity that are embedded in this ancient text. Think of it as getting straight to the good stuff, tailored just for you.
What's fascinating here is how the sources set the scene right away. They remind us this story happens during the spring.
Which, our sources point out, was traditionally the time kings went out to battle.
Hmm.
Campaign season.
Exactly. And this is where our first crucial detail emerges. David, the king, isn't with his army, led by Joab. He's back in Jerusalem.
Several sources really zoom in on this point. They highlight that this wasn't just unusual. They argue this idleness created a significant point of vulnerability.
Right.
You see familiar ideas quoted like idle hands are the devil's playground. Others describe it as a moment of spiritual torpor or neglecting his duty,
Hmm.
arguing that Satan is most effective in his approaches when the believer is comfortable and successful.
It's a powerful caution, isn't it? That even, perhaps especially when you feel secure and successful, you can be most exposed to temptation.
So David is home in Jerusalem. Sources describe him getting up from his bed late one afternoon, perhaps evening, and walking around on the roof of his palace.
A high vantage point.
Exactly. And from there, he sees a woman bathing. The text is quite direct. She was very beautiful in appearance.
And the source material gives us important context for this scene. They suggest Bathsheba's bathing was likely an act of ritual purification following her menstrual cycle,
Okay.
adhering to the purity laws described in Leviticus.
Okay, that's key context. And something several sources are keen to address is the idea, sometimes suggested, that Bathsheba was deliberately trying to be seen by bathing where she was.
Right. They strongly push back against that. The argument is she was bathing late one afternoon or toward evening, likely in an enclosed courtyard or garden.
So private.
Pretty private, yeah. David being on the roof at that specific time was unexpected. She wasn't flaunting herself in public. It required someone from a higher vantage to see her at all.
That perspective makes a significant difference in how you view her role in this moment. But David did see her, regardless of intent. What happens next?
Well, our sources meticulously detail David's actions. He didn't just look away. He sent someone to inquire about this woman.
He takes action.
And the report comes back identifying her fully.
Yeah.
This is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite.
David is told precisely who she is, including her marital status and the identity of her husband, a name he would have known very well. Uriah was one of his own renowned warriors.
Absolutely, one of his elite fighters. Despite receiving this crystal clear information, the sources tell us David then sent messengers to bring her to the palace,
Wow.
and he lay with her.
This act itself is where the sources really diverge in their emphasis, isn't it?
Absolutely. While the biblical text and the Masoretic text, that's the standard Hebrew version, doesn't explicitly describe force, many sources focus heavily on the power dynamic.
Yes, they argue that the sheer power differential here, king versus subject, political and spiritual leader versus a woman in that society, makes the idea of genuine consent extremely questionable.
It really does.
They see this as a clear abuse of royal authority. One source specifically notes David's role was supposed to set an example of righteousness by protecting the weak and vulnerable.
Exactly. And other sources trace David's internal steps that led to the act, describing it as a kind of downward spiral. They highlight the sequence. He stopped. He stared. He lusted. He sought her. He lost control of his passion.
It wasn't inevitable then.
No, it was a result of choices made along that path, a cascade of choices.
It's a chilling pattern. Now, one source we looked at offers a different angle, speculating on Bathsheba's perspective when she later sends words saying, "I am pregnant."
Right.
This source suggests there might have been a sense of, well, maybe even gladness in that message.
That's a fascinating take, and it's rooted in the deep significance of childbearing in ancient Israel. Sources remind us it was seen as a cherished blessing from God, vital for family and continuity.
Hmm.
The fear of barrenness was a very real anxiety for women then, something we see in stories like Sarah or Hannah.
And this source speculates that Uriah's frequent absences on military duty could have caused Bathsheba sexual dissatisfaction and perhaps concern about having children with him.
Yeah, it explores that possibility. And the source also raises the idea that by not resorting to miscarriage or abortion, Bathsheba honored her motherhood, and in that specific sense, was potentially more righteous than David on life preservation.
Interesting angle.
It is. It does cautiously touch on harsher interpretations some others raise, like having a murderous instinct for not resisting. But the focus of this source is ultimately on her role as a mother, especially in relation to Solomon later. It asks you to consider the complexity of her situation.
That adds so many layers to her character, beyond just being a passive object in the story. Okay, so the plot thickens dramatically when the pregnancy is revealed. David attempts a desperate cover-up.
Right. His first move is to bring Uriah home from the battlefront.
David asks him about the army and the war, what one source calls small talk focused on David himself, just chit-chat.
Then he says, go to your house and wash your feet, essentially telling him to go home, rest, and be with his wife.
Implying he should sleep with her.
Exactly. But Uriah doesn't go. This puzzles David, who asks him directly, why did you not go down to your house?
And Uriah's response,
Wow.
wow. It's incredibly powerful and reveals a stark contrast with David's actions. What does he say?
His words, quoted by our sources, are just striking. The ark and Israel and Judah are staying in temporary shelters, and my lord Joab and the servants of my lord are camping in the open field. Shall I then go to my house to eat and to drink and to lie with my wife? By your life and the life of your soul, I will not do this thing.
That is a profound statement of solidarity and integrity. How do the sources unpack that?
They explain Uriah's complete identification with his fellow soldiers roughing it in the field. Some sources link this to potential purity rites required during what might have been considered a holy war, where soldiers abstained from normal life, including marital relations.
More than that, though, it feels like a deep, visceral loyalty.
Absolutely. Several sources emphasize his deep integrity and loyalty, not just abstract duty to David or the nation, but a powerful band of brothers bond with his comrades. One source explicitly calls this a rebuke to David's own lack of commitment by staying home. It highlights the idea that soldiers often fight for one another more than for abstract concepts like flag or country.
And our sources also point out that Uriah wasn't just any soldier. He was listed among David's elite mighty men elsewhere in the Bible, underscoring his status and proven loyalty.
And what's particularly striking, as one source notes, is that Uriah was a Hittite, a non-Israelite.
Yeah, that's important.
This source uses his story as a powerful illustration that God accepted devout Gentiles long before the New Testament era, showing that a foreigner could possess more honor and integrity than the anointed king of Israel at that specific moment.
So Uriah's unwavering integrity completely foils David's plan. His attempt to cover up the pregnancy by making it look like Uriah was the father, it just fails.
Right, and seeing his first attempt fail, David chooses to escalate his sin to a truly horrifying degree. He invites Uriah to eat and drink with him, and, as the text says, he causeth him to drink, deliberately getting him drunk.
Tries to lower his inhibitions.
Exactly. Even then, Uriah still doesn't go home. He sleeps on his couch with the king's servants.
Wow.
One source observes that even drunk, Uriah retained his honor as a soldier,
Incredible.
which, as one source puts it, left David with no scruples left. He then wrote a letter to Joab containing Uriah's death warrant and, astonishingly, sent it by the hand of Uriah himself.
This letter instructed Joab to place Uriah where the fighting was fiercest and then withdraw, essentially ensuring Uriah would be killed by the enemy.
Just abandon him on the front lines. Joab follows the orders. Our sources suggest Uriah, being a seasoned warrior, likely understood the positioning he was given.
He must have known.
And it was essentially a suicide mission.
And so Uriah the Hittite dies in battle near the city wall, tragically taking some other soldiers with him in that same attack.
Collateral damage.
And one source points to David's cold response to the messenger reporting Uriah's death. Don't let this upset you. The sword devours one as well as another, as stark evidence of his increasing disregard for the lives of his men, a consequence of his spiraling choices.
It's an incredibly dark turn in the story, isn't it? And our sources highlight how it illustrates the devastating escalation of sin. They trace the path. From idleness to looking to lusting to adultery to deception and finally to premeditated murder.
Yeah.
It's described as an ugly chain that one sin can forge.
And a core lesson emphasized by our sources is the danger of trying to cover up sin instead of confessing it. The principle comes through clearly: if we cover our sin, we will not prosper.
Right.
The more David tried to hide the initial adultery, the more sins he committed, leading all the way to murder.
They also highlight this story as a powerful warning about vulnerability, especially after success. David was at the height of his power, yet that comfort and confidence exposed him to temptations he couldn't handle.
A common pattern, unfortunately.
Our sources remind us that no Christian should rely on past success as a security from failure in the future. You always have to be vigilant.
And that idleness we talked about at the beginning, it's not just physical inactivity. Sources connected to spiritual apathy, a kind of inertia. They quote ideas like, idle Christians are not tempted of the devil so much as they tempt the devil to tempt them. The alternative isn't just rest. It's actively growing toward God and directing one's passions towards higher things.
A major factor identified by several sources in David's downfall here is lust, which one source even calls a giant that slew David.
A giant.
Yeah, they suggest it's a valuable exercise for you, the listener, to identify your own giants, those specific areas where you are most vulnerable to temptation.
And on that point, there's a strong, clear call to action presented in the sources regarding temptation. Flee.
Don't stand and fight alone.
Right. Referencing Bonhoeffer and others, they advise outright flight rather than trying to fight lust in one's own strength. This connects to actively choosing what to focus your thoughts on, whatever is true, honorable, right, and deliberately taking every thought captive.
And hand in hand with fleeing is the importance of accountability. Sources stress that pursuing righteousness should be done with those who call on the Lord from a pure heart.
Community matters.
Absolutely. Having a trusted friend you can confess to and who can hold you accountable is presented as a vital defense against falling into these kinds of traps.
The narrative also forcefully highlights the abuse of power. David, as king, violated the trust and authority given to him. Our sources discuss how patriarchal structures, while ancient, can unfortunately lead to the victimization of those with less power, as we see here with Bathsheba.
Yeah, the power imbalance is central. And finally, there's a somber perspective on God's grace within the sources. While they note God had intervened to prevent David from mistakes earlier.
Like with Abigail.
Exactly. But one source suggests that by this point, David had perhaps taken advantage of God's grace one time too often, and God allowed the natural, painful consequences of his actions to unfold.
Consequences are real.
Yes. To reap what you sow is sometimes the most painful kind of consequence.
Yet, even in this incredibly dark and tragic story, our sources consistently remind us that the Bible records this shameful event with severe truthfulness. It doesn't hide the failures of its heroes.
No, it's brutally honest.
And despite the devastating consequences, the path back, through confession, is always presented as open. There's still hope even after this.
Our deep dive into 2 Samuel 11 has revealed a story packed with intense human drama, profound moral failures, and surprising moments of integrity from the most unexpected places.
Definitely.
We've traced the dangerous path of unchecked desire and the incredibly high cost of trying to cover up sin, seeing how different sources illuminate each step of that downward spiral.
We've also gained insights into the quiet strength of character in Uriah the Hittite, understanding how sources highlight his integrity and loyalty as a stark contrast to David's actions. And we've considered the complex situation of Bathsheba within her cultural context, exploring how sources challenge simpler interpretations of her role.
The sources have truly challenged us to think deeply about power dynamics, personal vulnerabilities, and the crucial importance of living with integrity and seeking accountability. It's a challenging narrative to confront, for sure.
It really is.
But one that is undeniably full of timeless lessons about the human condition and the constant need for vigilance, humility, and a recognition of the need for something greater than ourselves.
So, as you reflect on this story in our discussion, here is a thought to carry with you. Uriah's story shows us that faithfulness isn't measured by position or power, but by integrity in the face of temptation and loyalty to what is right, even unto death. What unexpected places might reveal that quiet strength of character today, often overshadowed by power or fame?